Bienvenue tout le monde au concert final de l'ensemble de recherche sur l'orchestration contemporaine. Welcome everybody to the final concert presentation of the Composer-Performer Orchestration Research Ensemble, which we call CORE affectionately. Please turn off your phones as we're recording this event for posterity and posting it on the ACTA website afterwards. This seminar is part of the Analysis, Creation, and Teaching of Orchestration project called ACTA. And ACTA is an international transdisciplinary partnership funded by SSHRC that aims to bring timbre and orchestration to the forefront of scholarship, practice, and public awareness through collaborations among world-class artists, humanists, and scientists, as well as among brilliant student composers, performers, conductors, and music researchers, which we have some examples of here, and back there as well. So basically, 6 higher education institutions in Canada and the US and Switzerland participated in the CORE project. And CORE is intimately involved in pedagogical and compositional innovation through its unique approach to introducing considerations of perception and cognition of timbre and orchestration to compositional and performance practice. It provides for extensive collaboration between composers and performers in exploring, imagining, and solving orchestration issues with heterogeneous ensembles that present orchestrational challenges. CORE thus adopts a research creation approach in which the collective artistic research gives rise to the creation, but also to oodles of data for analysis from workshop recordings, sketches, interviews with the students, and written reports. The event this afternoon is the culmination of the 3rd round of CORE project at McGill, with a quintet composed of violin, bass clarinet, trombone, vibraphone plus small percussion, and electronics this time. Our first thanks go to SSHRC for funding this 7-year ACTA adventure, and to McGill University's Vice President of Research and Innovation and the Schulich School of Music for their enthusiastic financial and infrastructural support. This project has also benefited greatly from the technical and logistical support of Kermit and his marvelous CFI-funded venue, with special thanks to Yves Méthode, Julien Boissineau, and Sylvain Pohu. It's been a great pleasure to work with a fantastic pedagogical team this year, who brought diverse musical and technological perspectives to the seminar. Andrés Gutiérrez Martínez is a composer and actor postdoc, and Louis-Michel Tougas is a composer and doctoral candidate. They provided the technical support for all sessions and important input on many compositional and performative issues. Joshua Rosner is a doctoral candidate in music theory and a composer who helped us keep our focus on the creative input from performers as we attempted to weaken the traditional composer-performer hierarchy. Charles Fontaine provided remarkably insightful input on conducting, performing, notating, and composing for all the students, whose level of expertise has increased notably over the 2 semesters as a function of Charles' precision-oriented approach and fine musicality. And finally, and most importantly, we had a stellar group of graduate student musicians this year who really made the journey both exciting and thought-provoking for all of us. On the performance side, we had conductor Jeremy Ho, right here, violinist Olena Kaspersky, bass clarinetist Ostap Kuchmiy, trombonist Erynne McPhee, and percussionist Joseph Chang. And I personally learned a lot working with all these people. On the composition side, we had Yulin Yan, Lorenzo Paniconi, and Jonas Regnier, who are all sitting in the back. They'll come up in a moment. And the idea here is that working with these students and observing all of them as they analyzed, explored, and solved orchestrational problems and brought to life the 3 pieces we're going to hear this afternoon. I want to thank you so very much for your engagement and your musical intelligence. So the format for this event is to intersperse reflections by the students on this whole process with the 3 pieces. And so we'll start off first of all with Joseph Chang, who's a DMU's performance student in percussion. Joseph.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see so many faces, both new and familiar here. And so at the beginning of the seminar, I kind of came in with a strong interest in timbre and texture, especially from a percussionist perspective. And over the course of the seminar, my thinking was very compartmentalized into composition, performance, and research. But over the course of the seminar, these boundaries started to blur in a very meaningful way. The process of working directly with composers and other performers challenged me to think not just about what I'm playing, but why. and how my choices affect the overall sonic identity of a piece. There was always a constant negotiation between fidelity to the score and the reality of the performance, especially in an ensemble with unconventional instruments and electroacoustic elements. One of the major turning points for me was realizing that orchestration isn't just a composer's job, it is a conversation. Many of the textures we achieved together weren't fully captured in the score. They emerged through experimentation, dialogue, and listening deeply to each other. The process reshaped how I view my role as a performer. Of course, I became much more aware of how my sound fits into the larger spectrum and how subtle shifts in touch, articulation, or mallet's choice would radically change the ensemble's balance. The electronics provided a big part in how I should shape my sound as a performer, and much of the electronics provided a sense of reference in how I would work with it. Having the acoustic instruments reference the electronics was an interesting part. I know I will never sound like a synthesized sound, but if I could hear what our reference sound is in our ears, we can effectively shape the acoustic sound using our own intuition. And managing to emulate a bell sound using harder mallets, for example, but playing quieter was probably one of the more intriguing discoveries I made in this workshop that you'll hear later. In a research environment where our locations have been measured meticulously for today's performance, will be very interesting as a performer. I know that it will be a very different perceptual experience from our rehearsal rooms, which were much smaller and much more warmer. I know that in this hall, I know we will have some space to work with and space to fill, which will alter how I interpret the dynamics. But I know that a good performing space such as MMR, the acoustics, will definitely work for us, and hopefully our instruments sound very blended with the electronics. I also found myself reflect more on the challenges of notation. As a percussionist, I'm used to working with graphic scores, complex rhythms, and alternate systems, but when the notation became so precise that it disrupts flow or spontaneity, it can kind of get in the way of musicality. That was kind of the recurring theme in this seminar, and it made me realize the importance of advocating for notation that empowers the performer rather than overwhelms them. Where I've arrived now is with a deeper sense of agency. Timbre and orchestration are no longer things I simply interpret. There's things that I actively shape. The seminar showed me that being a performer is also about being a collaborator, a co-orchestrator, and even in some ways a co-composer. Thank you.
Joseph's referring to the fact that the room we were doing all of our workshops in was 27 degrees the whole year. So. Okay, so now we're going to play a piece by Yulin Yan called The Scent Blind, and then afterwards we'll continue with Yulin talking. But welcome Charles Fontaine, who's going to conduct this piece. Yulin Yan's a DMU student in composition. So welcome to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Yulin Yan. I'm very glad to be here throughout this 8 months research creation project. And for this whole journey, there were 4 distinguished phases, and I think that poses a very good timeline for composers, and we can really have time to develop ideas from beginning and through various workshops and rehearsals. And at the very first beginning, starting within the introduction phase, we were being introduced with the touch, the taxonomy, and also some interactivity mode for mixed music, which is my interest. And because we are composing for a mixed music setting here, so how acoustic instruments and electronics would interact with each other is the main concern for me at that time. And I was really interested and inspired also by the virtual musician model proposed by Mike Fringle, which was also introduced in our introduction phase. So I continue to explore in that way, which I want to achieve that the electronic component in my piece would have certain amount of autonomous entity. So what we hear now is already an outcome after troubleshooting phase, also after test and fail phase. Yeah, that happened to my exploration phase. I kind of just test everything and failed everything, and I need to find alternative solutions. So what we hear now, the electronic component have basically 3 layers, and one there are fixed tape, but minimum in the whole electronics, and then the live processing was achieved by real-time timbre classification through MFCC. So it's mainly happened for violin and trombone in this setting. And another part is audio-triggered samplers, which most of the parts, the electronics are kind of triggered autonomously by the musicians. So the idea was, I want each instrument have their corresponding sampler rack, and which contains 2 to 3 type of sounds, and which I conceive them as a family of instruments. And they will be triggered by the incoming audio and live adjusted by me, like in the backwards. And so in this case, each triggering instrument serve as an anchor sound of the whole compound gestures. So yeah, that was kind of a big challenge for my whole journey, which is kind of technical side, but it gets helped and revised every time we meet together with musicians and finally find a solutions for keeping my ideas but also achieving a good result. So, and another thing I think happens in the realization phase, which is some revision for the notation, which also mentioned by Joseph. And I took a lot of good suggestions by Chang, conductors, and also by musicians. And because it's a complex setting for mixed music, and although we've troubleshooted so many problems during the troubleshooting phase, but still, I think when everyone involved in the realization phase, it's always getting better and better. And yeah, that's, I'm really thankful for Stephen and for the whole team of pedagogical team. And thanks for Louis-Michel for monitoring my cues. And yeah, and for every musicians and also Chang for realizing my piece. Thank you.
And now our violinist, Olena Kaspersky, who's an MUs in performance and strings.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Olena. I'm the violinist of our little quartet here. I think at some point we've all said that we think of ourselves as a mini orchestra where you sort of get the best of each section of a symphony. So for our heterogeneous ensemble, we've all had to, or I should speak for myself, I've had to embody every instrument like I would do with other string instruments, like in a string quartet, with the cello and viola. And when I mean embody each instrument, whether it's in the way we begin a note or how I would sustain the speed of a trill, like a flutter tongue technique in a trombone, or tremolo, like a brush against a cymbal. Many different metaphors that I'm not used to thinking of when I'm doing certain techniques that I take for granted on violin. This semester, we also got to play etudes written for our ensemble, which is, I don't think there's any etudes that are composed for this instrumentation, but our wonderful TAs wrote some out for us to try, basically to experiment with our collective group timbre and kind of rehearse similarly to like what a homogeneous ensemble like a string quartet or a wind quintet would do. We worked on, bringing out certain voices of a major chord or gradually going from one timbre to a completely different timbre while remaining completely unison and blended. But I think it was very beneficial for the rehearsal process at large, to find our core ensemble sound. Yes, and also continuing with the topic of blending, just like a specific example. So I got to learn a lot of new extended techniques, as you probably noticed in the first piece, and there's more to come in the other pieces. And I play the whole range of the violin, which will also come later too. In my part, and also in I think the other instruments as well, there's a lot of in-between pitches, like quarter sharps, quarter flats, and the composers use them in different ways, either in the context of creating a complete blended timbre, or matching our timbres to create one timbre. Like in one, I think it'll be in Jonas's piece, all the instruments try to mimic and emerge from and continue the timbre of whatever the pitch that the electronics are playing. And the electronics are just a whole different topic. Like it's basically our fifth player of our ensemble. Or also going back to the quarter flats, sharps, the composers have also used them in a more divergent way, where the purpose is for them to create a dissonance against more tonal or regular notes, like an E natural against a E quarter sharp. So it's even smaller than a minor second interval, and it's very shocking to the ear. But it was really great this year to be part of each composer's compositional process, which is something I think, well, I haven't done ever. I don't know about you guys, but to be a part of that was really great, to work with each composer and understand what sounds they want to bring out or augment, and what sounds they want to have underlying, an underlying blanket of support for another instrument, or just stuff like that. And that collaboration really helped me envision and execute their ideas for each piece. And it was really cool to watch the birth and evolution of each composer's piece, and I'm really grateful for that experience. And yeah, thank you so much.
Now, Erynne McPhee is doing a Master of Music in Brass.
Hello. So in the brass world, usually I would say we're kind of, I don't want to say secluded, but like usually like in an orchestra, we're kind of in our own world, like off in the back. And I'm usually always playing with the brass. And really the only musical experience I have is like in orchestra or wind orchestra. And I'm always used to having kind of other people like me. In this ensemble, there's nothing really like brass. I came into this definitely confused and scared because I didn't really know how I was going to blend. I knew that mutes were going to be my friend, and they are my friend. I bring my mute bag every single time. But I also learned that I can use like my embouchure and my wind to blend. I had never really thought of, because when you teach like classical trombone, you have to have like a perfect embouchure the whole time, but that really doesn't help me here. I don't sound like anyone if I'm using like my loud, strong tone, so I kind of have to mimic the violin or the other instruments and like change the way I play, change the way I breathe, kind of change everything. So that's been really interesting for me, especially with like pitch bending and everything with the blend. And blending has definitely been different than I thought it was going to be. And then also the extended techniques, I really had no contemporary music experience. And I knew coming into this I was going to need to use like flutter tongue and different things, but there's a lot more techniques than I thought, like slap tongue, for example. I've only ever heard of that on like saxophones, but I've been asked to do slap tongue, and that at first I was like, there's no way that's going to happen. But I've learned with help, and I feel like I've kind of imitated slap tongue, and there's like in one of the pieces, it's written like helicopter noises. And at first we discussed it, and I was like, helicopter. Maybe you'll be able to catch it. But I've discovered the possibilities of trombone are a lot more different than I thought they were. So it's been really cool to like speak with the composers and everyone. And I've also learned to say no, which like in orchestra, you're like, well, so in orchestra you're usually given music and they're like, play this, and you learn and you play it. But here, composers have given us different versions, and I've been able to be like, this isn't really playable, or maybe we should do this. And it's been cool for me to like have the the talk with the composers, and also I'm able to like know what they want better. And then with the electronics, I've never worked with electronics. I don't really know how to work a computer, so I didn't really know what to do. But now I feel like I have a more basis of electronics, and I kind of understand a little bit better how to work with them. It's kind of, there's points where I have to ignore them, and points where it's really helpful for cues. And blending is definitely different, because when you think of like blended intonation, like with the ensemble, I can bend, but they can also bend, but electronics can't. It's just like preset. So that's like a different listening for me. The final takeaway from this, something I noticed a couple weeks ago, is probably one of my biggest issues with breathing. I never really thought that like breathing would be a huge issue, because like when you play in a brass, we talk about breathing at different times or stagger breaths. But I mean, clarinet breathes, but clarinet's able to like enter gradually and slowly, and I can't really do that. It's once my lips start buzzing, there's like the onset of the sound. So we've had to come up with different ways where I could blend, whether I use like the electronics to blend, or I come in after them, so there's not like a harsh onset. Yeah, it's making me think of things that I've never really thought before, and it's been really cool playing with everyone in this ensemble, and also having all these people with expertise that I don't know anything about. So it's been super cool. Yeah.
All right, now on to our next piece, which is Monochrome by Lorenzo Paniconi, and it'll be directed by Jeremy Hu. And now Lorenzo Paniconi is going to talk. He's a PhD in music composition.
Thank you. So I will say a few words on this piece. I would like to start by thanking all the musicians and all the people involved. It's a very nice adventure. And well, it has been said, the ensemble is very heterogeneous, to say the least. All instruments are different, very different from one another. And as a composer, the first thing I had in mind when coming in was what ways are there to make these instruments even sound together without having each instrument sounding in its own separate world. And I think I have found some strategies, let's say, for myself during the course of this seminar. And well, some of the issues I think were, especially blending the instruments to make one sound out of 2 or 3 or 4 instruments together. The balance between trombone and bass clarinet is a very fragile thing, and we have found, I think, an excellent one. And the same, I think, for the violin. There's, it's the highest of all the instruments, and as soon as it sounds that high, it will just come out no matter what. So you have to take that into account, I think, because when you're writing. And on top of that, we have electronics, and the electronics is, I think, a very good thing in here because it can do a lot to make things easier. It can also make things more difficult, as in technically and musically and everything that is related. We all know that very well, I think. And musically, well, what I did personally was to try to use it as much as possible as a tool to blend the instruments, to bring everything closer together, to make things sound together. There's different layers. I think it's probably not easy to hear on just one listen, at a concert especially. There's different layers of things happening all the time. Sometimes nothing is happening as well. There's some live processing that is happening, which is, I think, one of the things that helps most. There's some very subtle effects that just alter a tiny bit the timbre of the instruments in a way that just makes it blend better. There is tape, which is coming out of everything is coming out of the loudspeakers, of course, but the tape is coming out only of the loudspeakers, which also, well, when I composed that, I obviously had in mind the piece. I wrote first the instrumental part and then worked on the tape. And when I composed the sound files for the piece, I also had in mind, I was also trying to imagine ways in which these sounds would help the instruments to either mask the attack or take over the instruments, or just simply work as a background, making things sound more homogeneous or serve an artistic purpose. And then there is one instrument that is coming out of the percussion that you maybe saw, this big black pad there, that is just working as a synthesizer, in fact, live, which provides, I think, in my idea, provides some extra very low end to the ensemble. And it doesn't play a lot. I think it plays maybe 5 notes in the whole piece, I think. But it serves also this aim of bringing together. And yes, I think it's all.
Now, Ostap Kuchmiy is a Master of Music student in performance and bass clarinet.
Thank you everyone for coming today to listen to us perform the 3 pieces by the 3 wonderful composers. I would like to thank first Stephen for inviting me to participate in this project. The reason I was interested in participating is because I did my minor in music theory, so I enjoy learning about the theoretical aspect of music and also implementing that into my practice and my performance. And with this core project, I really was able to take what I learned in theory and put it into practice. Some words that have really resonated with me was from my CJEP music history teacher, who said that music before 20th century was music of the notes, and music after 20th century was music of the sounds. And until I started participating in the core project, I didn't really understand what it meant, but from learning with my colleagues and thanks to the researchers and technicians, it really pushed my mindset to another level to understand how the sounds that we create as musicians affect the sound of the ensemble, or even if we're playing by ourselves. And the project really, the way it's structured, when we began with the theoretical aspects, elevated my thinking about how orchestration works. Not only does, previously mentioned, musicians are no longer just musicians, we are orchestrators as well, because in the end, we are the ones who decide how we want to produce the sound. Even though if composer writes something, we can decide how we want to sound. And even something that, as I said, no longer it's about notes, it's about sounds. Even if something is written about a specific note, if you can produce it in a different way, that's up to us to produce it. And we were able to collaborate with composers on how we want to achieve the specific goals. And what I really liked is we also had, at the beginning of the first phase, we were able to tell the composers what we want to include in the piece potentially. And some of our ideas were included, and I'm really glad that I was also part of a compositional process to achieve the goal that you are hearing today. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for everyone.
And now Jeremy Hu, Master of Music in Orchestral Conducting. You're going to talk before you. Blah, blah first, the music after.
Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Jeremy, as you know, and I'm the student conductor in this core project. I like to share a few thoughts about this project, particularly in terms of how timbre and orchestration and the collaborative process impacted my role and perspective as a conductor. Starting with timbre and orchestration, working with a heterogeneous ensemble in electronics really challenged and expanded how I think about reading these pieces. So traditionally, as a conductor, a conductor deals with rhythm, balance, phrasing, and cueing. But in this setting, it wasn't just about keeping time. It was about sculpting the sound. The palettes of timbre was so varied, including acoustic instruments, extended techniques, faucet sounds, and live electronics. I had to shift from thinking in terms of sections and roles to thinking in terms of textures and gestures. The electronics especially brought a sense of spatiality and subtlety that required a different kind of listening, both for me and for the ensemble. Conducting this kind of piece felt more like choreographing motion through sound. For example, instead of a sharp cutoff or cue, it might be a soft gesture that encourages decay, reverb, or linger. I found myself using my body differently, smaller and more fluid, and sometimes even choosing when not to gesture to allow space for sonic emergence. Now, onto the collaboration, which I would say was the most fulfilling part of this process. As a conductor, you're often the bridge between the composer's intention and the performer's realities. But in this project, that bridge was more flexible. I wasn't interpreting a finished score. I was involved from early on, giving feedback, trying things out in rehearsal, helping the composer hear things live and adjusting details on the spot. This meant that my role wasn't just to lead, but to also listen deeply to the composer, to the ensemble, to electronics, and to the interactions between all of them. I had conversations about phrasing, pacing, and blending, about how a certain attack might change the balance of a texture, or how a timing adjustment could help sync with an electronic cue. In many ways, the rehearsal room became a kind of a creative lab. And what stood out most to me was how much the performers brought up to the table. There were moments when a small question like, should this feel more like an echo or a response, led to real shifts in how the passage was performed. The project reminded me that conclusion or conduction isn't just direction, it's connection between people, ideas, and sounds. And that the more I opened up to those around me, the composers, players, and researchers, the more cohesive and meaningful the music became. So for me, this experience wasn't just about leading an ensemble through a new piece. It was about building something collectively and learning to trust not only my musical instincts, but also the process between the people around me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And now for our last piece by Jonas Regnier. I can't remember the title, it's very long. Que le vent sonne les échos du passage.
And last but not least, Jonas Regnier, who's a PhD in composition.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you everyone for being here. So my name is Jonas, and this project was a great opportunity for me to further my knowledge and understanding of mixed music, especially as far as timbre and orchestration are concerned. Writing for this ensemble plus electronics was definitely intimidating at the beginning for me, but it brought a few challenges that affected my compositional approach and ideas. So first, this was the first time that I wrote a mixed piece for ensemble and electronics. So I've had experience with writing solo pieces for electronics and instruments, but never with ensemble before. So this raised the challenge of managing to deal with two blends at the same time, the internal blend of the ensemble, so how to make sure that all four instruments would kind of make one sound. And then the second blend is the blend between the instruments and the electronics, which is a very, we can consider electronics as one instrument, but it's a very different instrument from all the acoustic instruments. So that was like the second challenge. And so to tackle this issue, I decided to apply the same live electronic treatments to all instruments. And I also used recordings from the instruments also in the tape that you've heard. So it was mostly, the electronic was mostly composed on tape, so fixed media. But I used some live electronic treatments, very simple, like reverb, to help make the blend better between the instruments and the electronics. The second biggest challenge was to achieve a good balance in the dynamics between all the instruments and also the electronics. So obviously we have the trombone, which we all know is kind of like a pretty loud instrument. So without the mute, it's kind of challenging to achieve, you know, like the trombone to stay at a quieter dynamic than the other instruments. And also the vibraphone is a very salient timbre, very bright. So that was also another, I guess, challenge to make sure that these two would not be too loud or too salient compared to the other instruments. And this challenge was mostly achieved through rehearsals, making a lot of modifications and adjustments in the dynamics on the score, and also adjusting the volume of the electronics to make sure that none was louder than the other. Another issue that came up was the spatial contrasts between the fixed media, so the electronic and the ensemble. Because obviously none of the sounds I used in the electronics were recorded in these acoustics. It would have been nice, but fortunately it's not possible. Most sounds that I recorded from the instruments, they were done in either a semi-anechoic room or a very small room, so the acoustic is very much smaller than this one. And on the contrary, other sounds like soundscapes, like the bell sounds that you've heard, those were recorded in much larger acoustics, right outside, or some synthesized sounds that they are recorded through software. It's like there is no space. So there was a lot of like spatial contrast between the electronic sounds and the ensemble in this room. So a solution that I used for this was to create a common space, again, through the reverb live processing treatment, so that they all come out kind of from the loudspeakers, both the ensemble and the live electronics. And something also that I found was useful was to put the ensemble closer to the loudspeakers. And that's something we all noticed during the rehearsal, is that if the ensemble was further away from the loudspeakers, then it was the result was less blended. Another question I asked myself when writing for the ensemble was how to group instruments, whether everyone should be playing together 2 versus 2, 1 versus 3, and how to create coherent interactions or dialogues between the ensemble. It's also something that Yulin mentioned in her speech, and that's also something that I was quite interested in. And kind of, so the interactions between the electronic and the ensemble, should the electronics be like in the background or in the foreground, which should augment which. So I was thinking a lot about these questions, and I kind of chose to use kind of a little bit of both. So sometimes the ensemble was trying to imitate the electronics, just like with the bells. Sometimes the electronic was augmenting the instrument, so I kind of tried to play a little bit with everything. And as for the collaboration aspect of this project, I found that all the interactions between the conductors, the theorists, the researchers, the composers, and the musicians, they were very useful, very efficient. Obviously, I learned a lot from all the musicians' feedback and suggestions when we met, either during the workshops or individually, during the recording sessions, where we would explore specific contemporary techniques. This was all very useful. And also being able to witness the growing and development of Yulin's piece and Lorenzo's piece was also very interesting for me as a fan. It's always good to see how other composers write with similar constraints, but they write very different pieces with their own styles. And to conclude, I would like to thank Actor and Stephen McAdams for making this project possible, and then everybody, all the musicians, the conductors who participated in this research creation projects. I always believe that making music should be a collaborative process between musicians, conductors, composers, theorists, sound engineers, as it allows for much more diversity of perspectives, knowledge, and methodologies. Thank you again.
Merci, Jonas. I'd like to ask all the composers and the whole pedagogical team to come up, and conductors as well. Yes, of course. So we can get the whole team up here. And thank you all for a very fantastic event. This was wonderful. Thank you very much. It was beautiful. It was really beautiful.